Now, the 12th annual Desmond Tutu International Peace Lecture is taking place in Cape Town tomorrow. It will be the first lecture since Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu died at the end of last year. The event is being held on the Archbishop's birthday and will honour his extraordinary life whilst reflecting on his legacy into the future. So the speakers will include Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Amina J. Mohammed, and best-selling author Doug Abrams. The Nelson Mandela Foundation also confirming the annual Nelson Mandela Lecture will be held in eThwekwini for the first time on November the 12th, with the theme, Do What You Can with What You Have Where You Are. The lecture will explore key international concerns such as climate change and food insecurity. Sherwin Bryce Pease spoke to Barbados Prime Minister Mottley, who will deliver that lecture, and that was on the sidelines of a UN General Assembly in September. We brought you a little excerpt of this great interview last night. Here is the full thing. Enjoy, and that is a wrap from me and the news team. See you soon.
Prime Minister Mottley, welcome back to SABC News. It's good to see you.
Good to see you again too.
The theme of this year's Nelson Mandela Lecture is Do What You Can with What You Have Where You Are, as they seek to explore issues of climate change and food insecurity in particular. Two key challenges, Prime Minister, facing the world today. How do you interpret this theme and what it envisions for a world in desperate need of action and implementation?
It's fundamentally about the power of agency, the power of the individual to make that defining difference. At the end of the day, an economy is just a collective of individuals, individual people, individual households, individual companies. And I think that our ability to underscore the importance of us having food security, it speaks for itself. But if we're going to be able to take care of those who can't take care of themselves and who can't produce for themselves, then we need to go beyond that which we can do individually to take into account others. So it's important because we're not going to win this battle without scale, and we're not going to have scale without mobilizing the majority of our population into action.
You have emerged as a strong voice against global inaction, particularly when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs, climate change, in particular, Prime Minister of a small island developing state. You say small island states are carrying the cost of the G7 industrialized nations on your balance sheets. What do you mean by that?
Well, effectively, their actions by building out the Industrial Revolution, by the way, from our blood, sweat and tears, if you recall too, has effectively led to the increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Most people don't realize that the greenhouse gases are built up not just by those who are producing today, but it is the stock that has also contributed significantly. And that stock fueled the Industrial Revolution. Now, who is at the front line of the crisis? It's us. And therefore, when we have to rebuild homes, when we have to rebuild critical infrastructure, when we have to do coastal defenses to save our wells from, or aquifers from saltwater incursion, all of these things are being carried on our balance sheet. And it takes away from us being able to build schools, to improve curricula, to be able to build hospitals, to create opportunities, to have general social protection. And that's the inequity of the moment.
Despite the climate emergency that is with all of us, right? Just ask the people in the Horn of Africa or the Sahel, where drought and famine threatens. Puerto Rico and Pakistan find their large swaths of their territory underwater today. California, where runaway fires are now commonplace. Far too many countries and regions are distracted, though, by conflicts, right? Essentially fiddling while Rome burns. There's a real sense, Prime Minister, that too many countries have taken their eye off the ball. How do we correct that?
Look, we have to remember that there's certain things that we can control and there's certain things we can't control. And many of the conflicts are things that we can control because it is how we perceive a set of facts, and it's how we perceive interests, and it is how we bridge those interests that we have that are different. The battles that we need to fight are those to save our planet. The battles that we need to fight are those that affect us because, for example, if we now have infections becoming more and more common and we don't have the antibiotics that can cure them, then we're going to, because of antimicrobial resistance, then we're going to have more and more people dying from doing ordinary things in life that we took for granted. And these are the things that bother us. So let us work together and build bridges and work for the peace on those matters that we can control, such that we can work together against those matters that we either can't control or we have difficulty controlling, like the climate crisis, like the antimicrobial resistance, like the COVID-19 pandemic.
But you'd agree, Prime Minister, we talk more about Ukraine than we do about antimicrobial resistance, right?
But that is because the world is still cast very much in an imperialistic order, and that's not in any way to diminish the horror of what is happening in Ukraine to ordinary people. But what about the people in Tigray? What about the people in Syria? What about the people elsewhere in the world?
In Haiti?
What about the people in Haiti? And I'm bringing it back home, where there's no formal war, but where effectively, because of the breakdown in law and order, that there is civil unrest, there is civil strife.
You are the 8th Prime Minister and the first woman to hold that position in Barbados, with sweeping electoral victories, one might add. You are also the co-chair of the UN Secretary General's Sustainable Development Goal Advocates Group. I want to get your perspective on the linkages between climate adaptation, the Green Revolution, and how that must interact with the empowerment of women.
The opportunities the Green Revolution present for us to be able to adapt to the new reality in this climate crisis are tremendous in terms of jobs. And as we create those jobs, we can't forget the need for them to be fair. Fair in access and fair in terms and remuneration. Regrettably, too many women continue to earn less than men for the same job. That cannot be the way in which we transition to a just green revolution.
Or nothing at all for care work, right?
Or nothing at all for care work, as we know only too well. Largely because we don't value those things, we take them for granted, largely because that was what a woman was supposed to do. We have to rethink what we value and how we value it. And this green revolution gives us a chance to start with a clean slate. And I do hope that, given all that we have learned and all of the experiences that we have, and given the informed wisdom fundamentally of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, that we will do so in a manner that is fair and just and will create opportunities for girls and women that hitherto would not otherwise have existed, starting from education right back through to entrepreneurship.
Let's talk a bit about what a just transition looks like. Common but differentiated responsibilities. You've called the failure to produce even the $100 billion for the Green Climate Fund immoral. And yet we are increasingly hearing that $100 billion is probably going to be too little. Talk about the financing that needs to happen here.
Yeah, the truth is that, look, that figure was set at a time to get countries like my own and other small states to agree to the Paris Agreement. I don't want to believe that it was just a lull. I want to believe that it was real. And I want to believe that it was an honest, sincere attempt to be real. We all know the power of inflation, especially today. And therefore, that which was agreed in Paris can never be appropriate to the task. So we use the 100 billion as really more of a metaphor than a reality. And that is why I keep calling for there to be a connection between commitments and capacity. Commitments so that we can cost them, and capacity so that we can supply and make it real. You know, I say all the time that a brand is only as credible, as it is real. And if we can't make the net zero commitments, whether in 2030, initially, because for 2050, some people can't even think that far ahead. But if we can't make the 2030 commitments real, then we really are going to have a disruption in today's world. And yes, people will be living, but how many more will die? And we saw, and we were reminded in the most horrific of ways with the COVID-19 pandemic, that people do die. I'll end on this point. This generation of leaders and of people who occupy this planet must never be so arrogant as to believe that there cannot be failed societies or extinct species. We have seen in our history failed civilizations. We have seen in our history that species do disappear. I have never seen a dinosaur. I don't know what the majesty of the African civilizations that came before Europe tore Africa apart looked like, or even the Greek and Roman civilizations.
We've also seen how history repeats itself, right? And I think that's the point you're making.
Regrettably. But what we must never do is to be so arrogant as to believe that because of technological improvements, because of general improvements in well-being and welfare, that we can avoid that which history has shown us can happen.
I want you to touch on this global compact you called for in the General Assembly on long-term financing for development. You've talked about 30-year loans. Just speak to that, Prime Minister.
Well, the reality is you can't finance development and pay for it in 7-year and 10-year loans because you crowd out the other things that you have to do. When you go to buy a house, you don't take a 5-year or 7-year loan.
25 years at least,
you take 20, 25, 30. And similarly, if we're building schools, we're building hospitals, we're building roads that are intended to last for 30, 40, 50 years, we have to be able to match the lifetime of the asset or the investment with the financing.
Right.
And if not, we're just not going to be able to afford to do the things that we have to do.
Let's switch a little bit more to South Africa and Nelson Mandela in particular. What has your personal experience, Prime Minister, been of Nelson Mandela? I'm not saying asking you if you've met him. I'm saying what were your thoughts, or how did you interact with the idea of Nelson Mandela? And how does his example inspire the leadership that you've brought to bear on the international stage?
Regrettably, I never met him. But for all of my life, he was a symbol of that person who had been unfeared. I don't use the word injustice or any of those things. I keep it simple, because as a child, we all were taught about the need for fairness. And yet here was this man who was imprisoned for my entire childhood. When I went to university in London, the movement against apartheid was live and real. And I had the good fortune to see and be a part firsthand of those calls to ensure that the world stopped being an accomplice to the crime that was being perpetrated against the people of South Africa purely on the basis of race. I can never forget the Sunday morning when he walked to freedom. And it is etched in my mind, and we were there in Barbados, thousands of miles away, as if he was just outside of our own house. His example, and that of very few others, was one of strong moral leadership. And when I speak today of global moral strategic leadership, there is no greater example, an icon of it, than Nelson Mandela.
You said
equally, and let me finish. I just finished giving the Kofi Annan lecture, and it is ironic that he too was of that similar vein in terms of global moral strategic leadership. That Africa could give this world in the post-World War II era, in the post-United Nations era, two men of absolute great character ahead of their time. And for me, the greatest example of Nelson Mandela was in the moderation of the use of power. Because power is not meant to be abused. Power is meant to be moderated and to be utilized for the benefit of ordinary people. And when, therefore, power was given to him and he walked away from it, knowing full well that his was not a gift of immortality, but his was a gift to be a teacher and to be a bridge to another generation, he played his part in the relay and have left it for us to be able to pick up the baton and to continue and to build upon it.
I was just going to say, I dare suggest the baton is in your hand, Prime Minister.
I'm not sure that I'm equal to the task, but I am sure that his is the lesson and the star to which we must all aspire.
You asked at COP26 in Scotland late last year, when will leaders lead? What leadership looks like in this moment, particularly in the context of this growing deficit between trust, between the governed and those that govern. I mean, that's a really big issue right now, right?
I just spoke about it, literally. I just spoke about it in the Kofi Annan lecture. If we don't give people a stake in the societies in which they live, in the communities in which they live, they will feel excluded and they will have nothing to lose. And the greatest tragedy, and I put it very, very simply again, is that we need our people globally to be seen, to be heard, and to be felt. Because I have confidence in the power of humanity. There are some people who will test it, and there are some people who may be sociopaths. but the majority of the world's populations, inspired by the religions that the faith that they have, work to treat people better and want an improvement for their lives. We have to see them and give them that opportunity. And if we don't, then we cause them to feel that they have nothing to gain by being able to build peace and to protect humanity.
I'll quote you back to yourself in the General Assembly. Fairness and togetherness are needed to bring about peace, love and prosperity in the world. And this is not romanticism. These are hard realities that simply require decisions. And again, it speaks to leadership.
Yep, and look, let's move from the individual to the international. Explain to me whose decision it is to make the African Union a part of the G7, to make it G8. Whose decision it is for them to be part of the G20. How do we justify the European Union as an institution included, and the African Union that is responsible for 1.4 billion and that will have the greatest demographic youth dividend between now and the next 20, 30 years being excluded?
Have you heard an argument against the AU joining?
No, nobody's going to give you an argument, but the question is who's going to make the decision? And the decision is just simply the right thing to do, but somebody has to make it. Is it going to be the US? Is it going to be France? Is it going to be the United Kingdom? Is it going to be Canada? Is it going to be the European Union? Is it going to be in the wider group, India? Is it going to be Saudi Arabia? Who is going to do it?
Well, I know President Ramaphosa was just in DC, met with President Biden at the White House, and that very issue did come up, Prime Minister, so we'll see how that plays itself out.
We hope and we pray for the justice of the international community to be met.
Final question for you. What are you most looking forward to? You said to me earlier you haven't been to South Africa in 20 years. I told you it's a changed country. What are you most looking forward to?
Just being able to mix with the people, to experience and to talk and to learn and see how we can work together to make this world a better place. You know, I wish we could build literally a bridge that we could drive over, but we can't. So let us then build the bridges between Africa and the Caribbean that remove the middleman that has been so much a part of our history and current reality, that remove the middle leg, and above all else, that removes the scars of the middle passage.
Prime Minister, it was such an honor to have this time with you. Thank you for making time to speak with us.
Thank you yet again for having this conversation.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister Mia Mottley will deliver this year's Nelson Mandela Lecture in eThwekwini, November 12th. This year in South Africa, and South Africans can look forward to some unvarnished truths and some powerful oratory. Trust me, I've watched.